Well, now I want to bring in our next guest, Beth Sandor, Principal at Community Solutions. Now, Beth has spent more than 20 years working in the field of housing and homelessness, both here in the US and in the United Kingdom. She is also the co-director of Built for Zero, a national movement of more than 80 communities working to end homelessness, measurably end homelessness. And I love what Beth is going to talk to us about today. So Beth, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. What a pleasure to be here and to have the honor of hearing Dame Louise Casey talk before me.
Oh, Beth, thank you. Start, Beth, by telling us how Community Solutions thinks about homelessness.
Yeah, well, I think Louise Casey talked about it in detail, that first off, homelessness is completely solvable. And we are in a moment now more than ever when we see homelessness as a public health crisis. And I think COVID-19 has demonstrated that, with people experiencing homelessness twice as likely to be hospitalized with COVID-19, 2 to 3 times as likely to die if they contract the coronavirus. And we also know that in the public health crisis that is homelessness, Black and Native Americans are 4 to 5 times as likely to experience homelessness than white people. And these are not problems of individuals. These are problems of systems, and systems that we built. And just as we built these systems, we can dismantle them and build systems that actually work and get the results that we all seek to get, which is ultimately a sustainable and, as you said, measurable end to homelessness across every community in the United States.
That's right. And I love the idea of the Built for Zero movement. Tell us a little bit about that and how that got started.
Yeah, like Louise Casey talked about, it's been a very long journey, kind of a 20-year journey for our organization of learning and iterating, but with the mission always being a lasting end to homelessness that leaves no one behind. And that work started 20 years ago with the kind of intuitive belief that I think everyone listening will connect with, that housing is the solution to homelessness. And so our team started in New York City building beautiful permanent supportive housing. We built over 3,000 units of housing across New York City, but after doing that for a decade, had to take a hard look at, there were still very vulnerable people on the streets outside those buildings. And so while we were winning awards for that, we weren't really making the difference we thought we were, that our buildings ended homelessness for the people that were lucky enough to get inside them, but that systemically we weren't seeing that change. And so we started to talk to people sleeping on the street and ask what was their experience. And when you do that, you quickly find out the kind of horrible chutes and ladders process that people, very vulnerable people, have to navigate to be able to move off the streets or out of shelter into permanent housing. And so we had this aha moment of, okay, this is a process improvement problem. This is a systems change problem. And so what if we designed the system really around the user? If we said, who is the most vulnerable person, but for us redesigning that system won't come off the street into housing. And so we launched in 2010 a national initiative called the 100,000 Homes Campaign, where the mission of that was to start with the most vulnerable people, the people with highest mortality risk, and redesign the system for them. And a lot of that work was really built off of the work that happened under Dame Louise Casey's leadership in the UK. And so we took that and said, okay, how do we make that work here in the US? And so we did that. And after 4 years and working with 186 cities who housed 105,000 very vulnerable people, we saw a lot of great results for individuals. But what we also didn't see is that at a population level, the cities and communities we work with, we expected that if you housed lots of very vulnerable people and redesigned your systems to accelerate housing placements, you would see the overall population reduce. And we just didn't see that. So in 2015, we got back together again and said, okay, what are we missing here? And we designed what is now Built for Zero to answer the question, how do we move away from counting up to housing placements and instead count down to a population level reduction that is sustainable and measurable and consistent across the United States. And so we invited any community who was willing to work with us on that to come in. And we were lucky enough that 75 at that time and now 80 communities kind of raised their hand to solve for impossible, to say, okay, what would it take to do this? And we have learned so much over the last 5 years of this work, and have seen now 12 communities that have ended sustainably veteran homelessness and or chronic homelessness on a path to ending all homelessness across their communities. And that's our mission now, is how do we create credible evidence, proof points across every type of community in the United States that this is possible and scalable.
I love that you're taking a data-driven approach to ending homelessness. You're taking a look at it, you're analyzing the data, you're going back to the drawing board, you're iterating, and then being really innovative. And you mentioned, and we talked about this earlier, there are over 80 communities that you're working in. What does it look like in one of the communities that have successfully ended homelessness?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I'd start by explaining what it feels like to a person experiencing homelessness when a community ends it. And one of the first communities that ended veteran homelessness, Gulf Coast, Mississippi, which is a region of 6 counties in Mississippi, when they ended veteran homelessness, if you were a veteran and you became homeless, you would be permanently housed in 11 days. And that is so powerful, to live in a community, in a region really, that you can trust that if the worst thing happens to me, if all the other systems fail me and I become homeless, that in my community, people will ensure that I get safely rehoused in 11 days. And that's what we want it to look like in every community across the country for every single person. And that is happening now in communities we work with and is within our reach to scale. But we have seen among the 12 that have ended for one or more populations, and the 40 plus communities that are seeing reductions, all of them have had kind of 5 key things. And I think Louise touched on a lot of these. The first is a commitment to a shared measurable aim, that ending homelessness is not just a slogan or a notion. It is something that we can objectively measure and are committed to looking at all of the programs and all of the investments across our community are going to add up to getting to zero on homelessness. And we're going to look at that every day, every week, every month, and know if we're making progress. So that's the first thing we see in communities who are making progress or have gotten to zero. Second is a data feedback loop, both qualitative and quantitative data on what's happening in the system and what's happening for people. And I think this is especially important as we look at ensuring that our system isn't causing more racial disparity as we redesign these systems. And then they have a dedicated, nimble team who has the capacity and the capability to do systems change work. And I think we see in many communities that you're asking people to solve very complex problems on the back of other jobs. So they're doing program administration of federal funds, and then on the side are supposed to figure out how to solve for one of the hardest challenges in our communities. And we need to invest in a team like we have at the national level, but at the local level, who can really dedicate, live and breathe this issue without having to be distracted by other side jobs as well. And then that team, equipped with the data, equipped with the ability to be accountable for the aim, has testable, proven practices. So things like housing first and motivational interviewing and outreach, that they are testing solutions at the local level, but it's seen not as a recipe. There aren't 6 things every community in America should do. There are 6 things that every community should test and adapt in their context and see, is it driving reductions? And that team, and someone mentioned this in the questions, has access to flexible resources, so that the resources aren't constrained by something we thought would work 2 years ago, that team can pivot in response to the data when they get new information and have the resources to bring to bear. That if they find they need something different than they needed 6 months ago, they don't have to wait a year to apply for funding. They can move in that moment.
That's great. Anything else in addition to these 5 things that you mentioned that will make this a new reality for communities around the world?
I think, the belief that it is possible, not only among the people doing this work, but I think everyone who has influence over policy and resources. I think often we show up in a way that seems like maybe we actually don't believe we can solve this problem, and credible proof points. I think, the more evidence there is that communities are doing this, I think the more believable it becomes and the more of a reality it will become. The political will, I think Louise talked about this about in the UK when they made huge progress. That was because the political will was really brought to bear. And I think that is something that every person in a community can help do, is really hold mayors and county executives and businesses accountable for outcomes and say, are we driving reductions in homelessness? Do you have access to that data? And if you don't, we demand that you transparently get it and allow us to see what progress we're making for all this investment. And I think, one of the key things to make it a reality is to really move away from talking about homelessness as a static problem, which I think has really not served us well, as like, if we just build 10,000 units of housing, we can solve this problem. Homelessness is such a dynamic problem that is changing all the time based on the ecosystem in our communities, and that we need problem-solving skills, data, and an approach that is as nimble and dynamic as the problem is. And we need to talk about it that way and think about ending homelessness as really constantly solving.
Great. Now, I know you have a demo that you wanted to share with us today to illustrate how you're using the power of this data and the power of the Tableau platform. So I will hand it over to you to take us through it.
Great. Yeah, let's take a look at that demo. I think it will help bring to life and help people visualize some of the things that Louise and I have been talking about. So I'm going to show you the Tableau visualization for Kern County, California, which is in Northern California, a county of about 1 million people. Those community leaders have made a commitment to end chronic homelessness, which is long-term homelessness among people with disabilities. And this dashboard allows those community leaders to be able to look month over month, how many people across our county of 1 million people are experiencing chronic homelessness. Are all of these investments and activities adding up to fewer people experiencing homelessness this month than last month? And as you can see, they have done an incredible job over the last 6 months of really driving reductions and using this data to make decisions about how to do that. And I think that's the key, is that looking at this information every single month allows those leaders, implementers, to decide when something's working and they should scale or double down, or when they need to, something that they hypothesized would work is not happening the way that they expected. And as you can see, they held under 3 people experiencing chronic homelessness for 4 months. And then in May of 2020, it ticked up. But this data allows them to go deeper and really see, why did it tick up, and what levers do we need to pull? And I think Louise talked about the bathtub, and we think about that as how many people and who is coming into the system every month, which are the purple bars on this graph, and then who is exiting and how many people are exiting every single month the homeless response system. And what do we need to do to pull those levers to be able to drive reductions? And as you can see here, in November of 2018, the little red dot at the bottom there, square, lit up to tell that community, hey, inflow into homelessness is exceeding outflow. Something's going on here. You need to pay attention or you're losing ground. And then those leaders can dig in and say, okay, of the total people who came in, 21 people who came into homelessness this month, how many were completely new to the system? And how many people did we know were housed and fall out again? And as you can see, all of them were completely new, which means the right strategy there is partnership with upstream institutional players to figure out what is it going to take to keep people from coming into the system. And then in the same way, they can dig into outflow and say, okay, of the people that exited the homeless response system, how many were people we housed? How many people disappeared? And the strategies that community would use to accelerate outflow would be different, right? If they need to work on bringing new resources to bear, improving the housing placement process versus expanding outreach and navigation if people are disappearing. So, this is a little bit wonky, but the point of all of it is that it equips community leaders and implementers with the information they need to know, are we designing a system that is capable of driving reductions, and iterate and learn and create a data culture which allows that to happen at the community level. And our dream is that every county in America has a dashboard like this that is transparent and public and allows them to iterate and learn, but also holds them accountable for ending homelessness, which is completely within our reach. So if anyone wants to dig in more to what's happening with Built for Zero, you can check out builtforzero.org. And we're excited to see where this work goes next. Our communities are doing incredible work at the local level. I'll hand it back to you, Ebony.
Beth, that was absolutely my next question, is like, how do we get this into the hands of more people? So you just talked about the website. That was so powerful, and the data was so amazing. So thank you for bringing that to life and offering to put into the hands of anyone who wants it. So Beth, I really appreciate you being here with us today, and not just speaking about the issue of homelessness, but really showing us the work you're doing to solve it and how others can get involved. I feel very hopeful after speaking to both you and Dame Louise. Leah, I want to bring you back in. Wasn't that an amazing conversation?
It was, and you're right, Ebony. I mean, sometimes you think about the issue of homelessness and it feels so overwhelming, like this is not solvable. But hearing both Louise and Beth speak about it, I feel hopeful about it and really feel empowered to help. And I love getting data in the hands of the local community, so it doesn't feel so distant, right? I can actually go and look at the data and say, what is the data for my county? And I can see how I'm impacting it. So that's really powerful.
Yes. So I just want to close by saying, Dame Louise Casey, Beth Sandor, thank you so much for being here with us today. And Leah, I will turn it back over to you to close us out.